Welcome everyone to our biannual webinar, What's Happening in PWS Research. I'm Susan Hedstrom, Executive Director for the Foundation for Prader-Willi Research, and I get to be your moderator today. On today's webinar, FPWR's Director of Research Programs, Dr. Theresa Strong, will review what's happening in PWS research from recent outcomes to our newly funded round of grants. As always, we would love to hear from you, so please use Zoom's Q&A feature to submit your questions, and we will answer as many of them as possible at the end of the presentation. And with that, I'd like to hand us over to Dr. Theresa Strong.
Great. Thank you so much, Susan, and thank you to everyone who is joining us today. I'm really excited to tell you about some recent progress in the field and talk about some of the new grants that we're funding. I'll go ahead and share my screen. And as Susan said, please feel free to add questions as time goes on through the webinar. And Susan, please feel free to interrupt me if you think we have some questions that need attention right away. So today we'll be looking at an update on PWS research activities. I'll talk a little bit about some of the outcomes and interactions at our recent FPWR Research Symposium and Family Conference. And then I'll tell you about some of the new grants that we're funding in the fall of 2023. So I do like to start with our mission as a reminder, because everything we do really focuses on this mission, which is to eliminate the challenges of Prader-Willi syndrome and the related disorder Schaad-Yang syndrome through the advancement of research and therapeutic development. And we really envision a world in which all individuals with PWS and SYS are physically healthy, mentally well, and able to live full and independent lives. So everything we do really focuses on trying to achieve that goal. So how do we do that? Well, if we look at how new therapies are developed, we try to support every step in the process and accelerate each of these steps. So if we look left to right, we support discovery research, and we do a lot of that in our grant program so that we can better understand the genetics of PWS, what happens when we lose the genes in the PWS region, how the cells change. And then the preclinical development is using that information to identify drugs or devices or other therapies that might improve some of those changes that occur in PWS or Schaad-Yang syndrome. And those are usually done in cellular models of Prader-Willi syndrome or animal models of PWS. We then move to clinical development, where we take what look like the best potential therapies and test them in individuals with PWS and see if they are safe and effective. And then finally, once we get a new therapy, new therapies aren't of any use if we don't know how to use them well in the larger population. And that is this final stage in which any new therapy is applied to the general PWS population and optimized. And these all of these features or all of these aspects of the drug development or therapeutic development pathway are really dependent on each other. If we want to be efficient about finding new drugs that may help in PWS, we really have to understand what the changes are in a PWS cell or person compared to a typical cell or a typical person. And, as I said, if we have a therapy, we need to be making sure that we're using it to the in an optimized way. So all of these parts of the pipeline are really important to us. And because of that, we have programs and tools that will help support each of these aspects. Our grant program supports research across this entire spectrum. So everything from discovery research to implementing new therapies. And we'll see that today in the grants that we have funded this time. But we also have things like a stem cell bank and animal models and a clinical trial consortium that will accelerate each of these steps. So now a little bit about our recent symposium and family conference that was held in Denver last month. And I think it was really an example of the power of an advocacy organization like ours in being able to bring people together. That is such an important piece of what we do, and bringing different groups together so that they can interact, that they can build collaborations, and that they can work cooperatively together. So prior to the research symposium, we had a day in which we had two separate meetings. One is of the PWS CLIC and one of the PWS Clinical Trial Consortium. And both of those were really critical and I think, were really productive meetings. So the PWS CLIC is the Clinical Investigation Collaborative, and that is a network of, I think it's now 27, 28 sites in North America, so the US and Canada. You can see the map down there and see if you should be near one of these clinical sites, because they're all throughout North America and also in Canada. And so this is an opportunity for clinicians and clinical sites who take care of individuals with PWS to get together and share information. And their mission, which they developed, is to improve the quality of clinical research and medical care for people with PWS across the lifespan through collaborative investigation and research to support evidence-based care. So that group got together. And then we also had the PWS Clinical Trials Consortium, which is some of those same clinicians, but now joined by psychology researchers, patient groups, including PWSA USA, IPSO, the Prader-Willi Research Foundation of Australia, and all of the pharmaceutical companies that are in the space. And this group addresses those issues that are really important for efficient and effective clinical trials in Prader-Willi syndrome. So the PWS CLIC meeting, they really focus on building a de-identified database of clinical information. So sort of pooling their clinical data on the individuals they care for with PWS so that they can ask questions that, each individual site, it would be difficult to ask. So things like, the right age to start growth hormone, how adults with growth hormone are doing. And also some of the new drugs, like who's using Ozempic and is it effective? Those kinds of questions where they can pool their data and get better answers more quickly that will help guide the optimal care of individuals with PWS. And they have developed some specific clinical questions that they're interested in looking at. For example, the use of feeding tubes in infants. Some infants get NG tubes, some infants get G tubes, and what should be the recommendation of experts with PWS with respect to choosing between those different kinds of feeding tubes. And hypogonadism, individuals with PWS, as they hit puberty, they typically have an incomplete puberty. Well, when should hormone replacement therapy start? How should it be managed? Just again, optimizing the clinical care of individuals so that everybody across North America can have, a similar level of excellence of care in PWS. It was also a great opportunity just for them to get together and talk about, how they manage PWS in different ways and build those collaborations. The PWS Clinical Trial Consortium, as I mentioned, met shortly thereafter. Again, clinicians, pharmaceutical companies, patient advocacy groups. And the CTC has a specific work plan that it works on. And you can see the 4 projects that were the plan for 2023 here. And so we shared progress on each of those projects and also talked about what we wanted to focus on in, that's potential projects for 2024. Sorry, that should be 2024. What we want to focus on in the coming year. We'll be sharing some of this through blogs and other social media means. But for example, one of the projects for this year was how can we improve the clinical trial experience for clinical trial sites and also for participants in clinical trials. So Lauren Schwartz did a survey and did some interviews with clinical sites, and we've developed some recommendations, which we have shared with the pharmaceutical companies, hopefully to make the clinical trial experience better for, for families and for the clinical trial sites. Okay, keeping with the other activities of the symposium and conference last October, the scientific symposium was the largest one that we've had so far. We had more than 160 attendees, and it was really fantastic just to see this room full of very smart people, talking about PWS, presenting data, sharing new collaborations, etc. We had more than 30 oral presentations, more than 20 posters. One thing that we, decided was that we actually need to expand the scientific symposium next year. We need to make it 2 full days because there was so much good work that we couldn't fit in. So that's a great problem to have. We had scientists from 11 countries. We supported trainees, so young investigators who are, still training, which is a great time to draw people into the field of PWS. And there was so much discussion and collaboration. This is my attempt at science humor. When there's too many bacterial colonies on a plate, in our lab notebook, we write TNTC, too numerous to count. There were so many discussions and collaborations, and I had so many scientists come up to me very appreciative of the opportunity to meet others in their field who were working on similar things and talking about the collaborations that they were building. It was really extremely encouraging and just the kind of thing that we want to be doing as a foundation. So just at a high level, some of the things that were discussed in those meetings, of course, on the genetic front, some of you may recognize this is the region of chromosome 15 that has the PWS genes. Of all of these genes, some of the more important ones are MAGL2, that is missing in PWS. It's mutated in Schaad-Yang syndrome. So understanding the normal function of MAGL2 is really important. And also SNORD116. This is a cluster of genes that appears to be really critical for PWS. So there were several presentations talking about the function of the MAGL2 protein and the function of the RNAs that are made by this SNORD116 and the interaction between these two genes, which may be critical for PWS. And there was a lot of talk about these, these different models that we have, cellular models of PWS that we really didn't have even 5 years ago. There's dental pulp stem cells. So thank you to everyone who has sent baby teeth to the Writer Lab because they are being used, extensively to understand at the cellular level what is different between PWS and typical cells and Schaad-Yang syndrome as well. And there are groups that are making these organoids, or what is called brains in a dish. So allowing neurons in a dish to form, and again, comparing PWS neurons in a dish to typical neurons and looking at the gene expression changes, the cell phenotype. So how do they behave differently electrically, for example? And that's really important because if you can really nail that down and define that, then you can start testing compounds to see if you can make the PWS neurons behave more like the typical neurons. And that will give you, an idea of what would be good to take into a clinical trial. So there was a lot of discussion about this, and I think there are a lot of potential phenotypes. One of the nice things about this meeting is the scientists can get together, they can compare notes, and there can be a consensus about, okay, these are the most strongest, most robust phenotypes that we can, try to find drugs to impact. On the genetics front, and I'm a geneticist, full disclosure, so I really like genetics, but I thought there was a really nice example of a collaboration between academics, FPWR and industry, with a little shout out here to Soleno Therapeutics. So for those of you who enrolled in the DCCR study, the phase 3 study supported by Soleno Therapeutics, one of the things they did was do a genetic analysis, and sort of rather keeping that to themselves, they shared that information with an academic investigator, Dr. Buchikova, along with some of the clinical data. So the question here is, what is the impact of the different genetic subtypes of PWS and some of the DNA variants outside the PWS region on some of the clinical characteristics like blood pressure and body weight and behavior of PWS. So this is a pretty big group, about 150 individuals in which to be able to do that. And Dr. Buchikova is going through that data and presented some initial findings. For example, she found that individuals who had PWS by deletion tended to have a higher body mass index and a higher A1C, which is a measure of blood glucose levels. So that suggests that potentially individuals with PWS by deletion may be more susceptible to diabetes, for example. So that will need to be confirmed in other data sets, but using this information to get a starting point is really important. They're also looking at DNA variants outside the PWS region that might impact things like who has a higher risk of obesity and depression. And this all goes to the new, precision genomics that we hear a lot in the popular press. Like, can we use an understanding of an individual's genetic makeup to point out what they may be at higher or lower risk for? So this study complements what we're doing at FPWR, which is a genomic study we're piloting that several of you have been involved in, that we're getting data from as well. And we're collaborating with Dr. Buchikova so that we can combine the information from both data sets and strengthen each of them. So it's the first step in really having an idea of what genetic variants impact the severity of PWS so that we can eventually help families see what their higher risk aspects of the disorder might be. There was also a lot of data using the preclinical animal models, so PWS mouse models and a rat model of PWS and Schaad-Yang syndrome, not only to understand some physiology of the disorder, but also to test some new potential therapeutics. So obviously it's a lot better to test them in these animal models and get an idea of, which ones look the most promising before we go into people. So there were a lot of different studies, everything from cognitive changes to cardiac function, and testing drugs that hit many of the important symptoms of PWS. And then finally at the conference was a lot of information to build clinical knowledge by many different groups, many of the clinicians in the field, looking at things like, is a sleep study, who does sleep studies before growth hormone is prescribed, and what should be the guidelines around that? What is the glucose metabolism in individuals with PWS? How does that differ from typical individuals? So many different clinical aspects were presented and discussed by the attendees. And then we moved into the family conference, and some of the most interesting stuff, or what there was the greatest level of excitement about, was Soleno Therapeutics updated their randomized withdrawal portion of their clinical trial. So to step back, Soleno is developing DCCR for treatment of PWS. They completed a phase 3 clinical trial, but there were challenges because of COVID during that. And so the FDA asked them to provide additional data that DCCR is safe and effective in PWS. So big shout out to everyone who is participating in that clinical trial. Those individuals went through what was called a randomized withdrawal, where half of them had the medication taken away from them, although they didn't know which half, and to see if hyperphagia and other problems would come back if the medication was removed. And in fact, there was some really nice data presented by Dr. Jennifer Miller. That is on our YouTube channel. You can find it all on this FPWR page, explaining the data, which looked very strong. And then an interview with the CEO of Soleno, Dr. Anish Bhatnagar, who was interviewed by Susan, and Susan asked a lot of great questions about timeline and accessibility and things like that. It's really worth looking at if you have any questions about this new potential therapy, which we hope will be approved by the FDA. Soleno will be submitting what's called an NDA, or new drug application. They expect to submit that in mid-2024. So we hope to have an answer about that in late 2024 or early 2025. So that's very exciting for the field. But I will say, rather than sort of resting on those laurels as a community, I think it would be great to double down. So I think DCCR has shown, a lot of promise for treating PWS. But I also think that we need more tools in the toolbox. So I think that, there'll be individuals who will not respond to DCCR, or for other reasons, will not be able to take it. There are individuals for whom other symptoms of PWS are sort of more pressing. And so there's reason to try to get as many potential therapies through this pipeline and tested and evaluated in PWS as we can. So I will remind you that there are many clinical trials that are either enrolling now or about to enroll. And if we want to get all of these done, if we want to see if these things work in PWS, it's going to take the entire community really thinking about whether they have the bandwidth and are able to enroll in these clinical trials. So those are shown here, and I have put an asterisk next to, those programs that FPWR has financially contributed to. In some cases, our relative contribution has been modest compared to how much, for example, Soleno Therapeutics has spent on the development of DCCR. But we did provide support for the first clinical trial of DCCR in individuals with PWS, which set us up for where we are today. So that's very exciting, and we're very pleased about that, as well as the other investments that we've made into some of these other potential therapies, including a device study that will be opening hopefully at the very beginning of next year, looking at VNS for temper outbursts in PWS. So another behavior that can be a real challenge. So I'll ask, all of our members of our PWS community to please try to stay up to date on the clinical trials that are ongoing. FPWR has a website for this. Susan keeps it really up to date when new sites come on board, so you can see, where these clinical trials are relative to where you are and any updates on those. For example, Gideon Richter has just recently announced that their study their enrollment is going to be complete as of tomorrow, I believe. So there'll be, we make sure that you stay in the loop about what studies are open, what are enrolling, and where those sites are, so that you can consider whether enrolling in a clinical trial is right for you. We also have a lot of patient education material on that website. So you can think about, like, what questions should you be asking when you're considering a clinical trial, that kind of information. So please keep that in mind. And, I'll just do a shout out for one of the studies that is recruiting. This is a study that FPWR supported in its pilot phase, looking at caring for the caregiver. So we all know that it is challenging to take care of an individual with PWS. And especially if you as the caregiver are not in a great mental state, and that it's important for us to be mentally well in order to be able to take care of our children well. So this group, the Kelleher Lab, showed that their intervention, which is a telehealth intervention, helps parents feel more competent reduces markers of depression, anxiety, and distress. And with that data, they then applied for a grant from the National Institutes of Health, and they now have a very large program with a big grant from the NIH to expand the program. So they're enrolling right now. So caregivers who want some support, but this is great because it's all telemedicine, so it can fit into your schedule, hopefully much more easily. You can scan this QR code and find more information or go to our website. And, no discussion would be complete without a shout out to the Global PWS Registry. I hope all of you are members of the registry. If you're not, please contact us and we'll help you register if you're interested. We have a lot of information coming out from the registry. It allows us to look at characteristics of PWS across large numbers of individuals. And so we have 2 or 3 papers that we expect to be coming out about things such as feeding tube use and hyperphagia, and other things that we'll be sharing with you over the next couple of months. But would just suggest that if you are not a member, please join the registry, and if you're a member, please go in and update your record at least on an annual basis, and we're happy to help you with that. Okay, so now I'm going to move to the new grants that we've funded in the fall of 2023. And our grants program has been kind of the bread and butter of our organization. It has, as I said, we support research across the spectrum, everything from discovery research to optimizing clinical care. So all of these things have been included in our grant program, and it has allowed us to bring new investigators into the PWS space, which I think is really important to sort of build the number of scientists and clinicians who are familiar with and studying PWS. So this slide just shows some of the new publications that have come out in the last few months from FPWR supported investigators. So everything from using a gene therapy approach in a mouse model of PWS to reduce inflammation, which appears to be like a really important part of some of the pathology or problems that we see in the brain of individuals with PWS. So testing out, a target for that, all the way through looking at imaging and how individuals with PWS, how their brains react to food differently than typical individuals. And then examining an intervention, a play-based intervention to improve social cognitive skills in children with PWS. So lots of different publications reflecting the breadth of the research that FPWR supports. So let's talk about the new grants that have been funded in the fall of 2023. There's 9 of them, a couple in genetics and cell biology, one looking at new targets for therapy development, and quite a few looking at advances in therapies and care in people with PWS. So this is I won't read this because we're going to go through them one by one, but this is sort of the distribution. And for whatever reason, we just ended up with a lot of grants this time in this category of advancing PWS therapy and clinical care, which is always a good thing. So I'll start with the basic biology ones. Again, discovery, understanding how a cell is different when it's missing the PWS region genes is really important to being smart about developing therapies. And one of the challenges of PWS has been this SNORD116 cluster of genes. And they're unusual. They don't make a protein, so we can't study the protein. They just make RNAs, which then go off and do something that is not entirely clear. And it's been very difficult for scientists to figure out what those SNORD116 RNAs or SNO-RNAs are doing in the cell. And 2 projects, so we're going to support 2 different projects using 2 different new approaches that we think will give us an excellent chance of really pinning down exactly what these SNO-RNAs are doing. So the first is from Dr. Amanda Whipple, and she is a neurobiologist. She also has a lot of experience in RNA biology. She's at Harvard University, and she has some initial data showing that the SNORD116 RNAs directly interact with ribosomes. Ribosomes are the machinery in the cell that makes all the proteins. So obviously a pretty important interaction. So she has some nice preliminary data showing that in mouse cells, and with the FPWR funding, she's going to use her lab's optimized methods to look at human PWS neurons, or typical and PWS neurons, and ask if the same interaction is taking place in those human neurons. And then she's going to look at the impact of what happens when the SNORD116s are deleted as they are in PWS. So we're excited about this project because it is we like to bring young investigators in and give them, some of their initial funding, because a lot of times that determines where somebody ends up in their career. So bringing in someone who is young and smart and has expertise in RNA biology and neurobiology is really excellent for our field. She's using some innovative and highly sensitive cutting-edge technologies to better understand what SNORD116 is doing. And she has very promising preliminary studies in the mouse that, now will be translated to human. The long-term goal of her project is to characterize the normal function of SNORD116, look at the consequences of when it's lost, and that information should enable some opportunities to try to therapeutically intervene and recover some of the function that's lost when SNORD116 is lost. The next project, also focused on SNORD116 biology, is from Dr. He, and he is specifically looking at the SNORD genes, which make these SNO RNAs that I mentioned. They're known to be very important in PWS, but as I said, there have been limited tools at which to understand what they're doing in a typical cell and what happens when they're lost. So Dr. He has developed two new methods to map the targets of the SNORD116 gene. So what are those SNO RNAs, meeting up with, and what modifications are they making? And he'll be looking in both mouse and human cell lines and to understand how loss of the SNORD gene impacts PWS cells and animal models. So we're excited about this project because Dr. He is an outstanding researcher. He's a leader in the field of RNA biology. He's developed a lot of the techniques that many other labs are now using to understand the function of SNO RNAs. So he's going to apply that knowledge to PWS specifically. So this provides the potential to significantly enhance our understanding of what these SNO RNAs are doing in cells and what happens when they're lost from PWS cells. So again, that knowledge should help us be better able to identify drugs or therapies that can recover the function that is lost when the SNORD genes are lost. With respect to projects that are looking at new targets for therapy, we're funding a second year of support for Dr. Christian Schaaf, who's at Heidelberg University, and he'll be looking at the role of the oxytocin receptor expressing astrocytes in Prader-Willi and Schaad-Yang syndromes. So the lab has been looking at astrocytes, which are these like star-shaped cells in the brain that provide a lot of support function to neurons. And they've been looking specifically in astrocytes that express oxytocin receptor, and they've shown that these astrocytes are important in some of the social behaviors and other anxious behaviors that we see in PWS. And they found that there are differences in the number and location of these astrocytes in healthy mice compared to a PWS mouse model. So, they've got some really interesting results in the first year, and this funding will allow them to continue those studies and investigate whether these oxytocin receptor expressing astrocytes contribute to some of the changes in behavior that we see in the PWS mouse model, and whether these cells specifically are a potential target for therapeutic intervention in both Prader-Willi syndrome and Schaad-Yang syndrome. So we're excited about this proposal. This is a really nice image of an astrocyte over here, because this is an experienced researcher in Prader-Willi syndrome and Schaad-Yang syndrome. In fact, the Schaaf of Schaad-Yang syndrome is Dr. Schaaf, because he first described Schaad-Yang syndrome. The group has been very productive in year one, and we know that disruptions in the oxytocin system are key to some of the symptoms that we see in PWS and Schaad-Yang syndrome. And the long-term goal of this study is to provide insight into how this impaired oxytocin signaling affects behavior in a PWS mouse model, towards the goal of informing the potential development of therapies that potentially would target these specific cells. Okay, and now we come to 6 different projects that are really looking at individuals with PWS or supporting clinical trials or clinical care. The first of these projects is looking at skin picking behaviors in PWS. So we know that many individuals with PWS engage in skin picking behavior, and it can be really problematic. I mean, it's difficult socially if our kids have, sores all over their body, but it also medically is important. It sends, we see from our Path with PWS study that it sends a lot of people to the hospital, or they have to receive medical care if the skin picking gets infected. It's not understood what motivates skin picking in PWS, but Dr. Hall has had an interest in this. He's done some initial studies a couple of years back looking at doing brain imaging to understand sort of, where this originates. He's hypothesizing that individuals with PWS don't sort of hear their bodies very well. So they're not good at integrating what's called interoceptive processing, which is, understand, like listening to your body. And so he thinks that using a new form of brain imaging called functional near-infrared spectroscopy, he can better pinpoint some of these changes and some of the origins of the skin picking behavior in individuals with PWS. So we're excited about this study because we know that skin picking can be extremely difficult for some with PWS. We know some kids respond really well to N-acetylcysteine, but some kids just don't. So understanding the basis of skin picking and seeing if there are other ways that we can interrupt the skin picking cycle in individuals with PWS is really important. This is also a very experienced PWS researcher used to working with individuals with PWS, and that's always helpful in being able to get a project done. And the ultimate goal of this project is to inform the development of new targeted interventions to reduce skin picking in PWS. Another project in the clinical care or clinical trial area is from Dr. Ann Scheiman at Johns Hopkins University, and she is going to be looking at wearable devices and looking at heart rate variability as a potential measure of PWS behaviors, including hyperphagia. So we know that measuring hyperphagia in individuals with PWS is challenging. Right now, what's used most often is a questionnaire that parents fill out. But of course, that's subject to individual potential bias, also the environment and what's gone on in the last couple of weeks, for example. It would be very nice to have an objective and quantitative measure of some of the PWS behaviors, and the wearable technology, be it smartwatches or patches, there's many different wearables, is one way to maybe address this question of more quantitative objective endpoints for PWS clinical studies. So the goal of this study is to use a wearable device to continuously measure heart rate variability to assess the feasibility of using this as an objective marker of behavior in PWS. And your heart rate variability is that difference, the length between heartbeats, which changes based on your sympathetic and parasympathetic, like your fight or flight, kind of responses. We're excited about this project because there's an obvious need for more objective biomarkers for PWS clinical trials. Dr. Scheinman is an established clinical investigator, a member of the PWS clique, and has years of experience in the PWS field. Excuse me. The long-term goal of this project is to inform the development of a novel objective marker of behavior in PWS for things like temper outbursts, food seeking, anxiousness that can be used in clinical trials. The next project that is funded in this round is the application of advanced neuroimaging studies for PWS. And this is Dr. Stephanie Brown at the University of Cambridge. And they'll be applying advanced neuroimaging techniques and functional MRI to provide new aspects into two really important aspects of PWS, hyperphagia and mental illness. So the study goal here is to characterize hypothalamic function. And that's with respect to the hyperphagia and their relationship to eating behavior using functional MRI, and also to look at brain structure and neurotransmitter metabolism as it relates to psychosis across genetic subtypes of PWS. So we're excited about this study. This is another experienced PWS research group. They have a well-established group of patients that they have a really good relationship with. So they know these individuals, they know their degree of hyperphagia, what mental health challenges they have. So it's a well-characterized group. And they're using cutting-edge neuroimaging techniques to better understand how the brain is different compared to typical individuals, and also how it's different among individuals with PWS. So one of the important potential outcomes is, can we identify individuals who are most at risk for developing mental illness and catch that early so that we can prevent a mental health crisis? That's obviously a really important aspect of this work. Another important aspect is to identify markers of hyperphagia using brain imaging. And that information can, again, be an objective marker in a clinical trial to show if hyperphagia changes with a new drug, for example. Another important aspect or another important project that we'll be funding in this round is the effect of growth hormone treatment on premature aging and quality of life in adults with PWS. We know growth hormone is really important for helping children with PWS grow and develop, and there's a lot of evidence that it also is helpful in adults, but it's not widely used yet. And so we need additional evidence to be able to support the use in adults. Dr. DeGraff is, really interested in the aging process in PWS, and there's some evidence that individuals with PWS may have some premature aging, and that, in fact, growth hormone may be helpful in that respect. So she wants to look at that in a larger and more detailed manner in her adult population with PWS. So we're excited about this study. It's going to leverage a unique population of growth hormone naive adults in the Netherlands. So people who have not received growth hormone before will get growth hormone, and the changes in their aging process will be measured. And this is a large-scale study of adults with PWS and their experience with growth hormone, with a particular emphasis on how it impacts the aging process. And we expect this study will add to the clinical evidence that supports the use of growth hormones for all adults with PWS. And then a really interesting study is coming from Dr. Lucarelli at Mass General Hospital, and it's going to look at insurance claims data for emergency department and inpatient hospitalization in individuals with PWS. So we know we have great participation in the Global PWS Registry. Thank you for all who participate in that. We've done a natural history study looking over 4 years of individuals with PWS, which is going to give us a lot of information about those individuals and what sends them to the hospital. But we also know that we're not capturing, a large part of the population, individuals who are less well hooked into the advocacy community, for example. And there's a lot of, information that can be gleaned from insurance claims data. So the goal of this study is to analyze claims data from emergency rooms and hospitals, identify individuals with PWS and see what is sending them to the hospital and to the emergency room. How does their hospital stay differ from typical individuals? And, what is the morbidity and mortality that is occurring? So we're excited about this study. This is an enthusiastic clinical researcher with a background in psychiatry and a link to PWS. So we're excited to bring him into the field. We expect this study will be able to identify clinical problems, mortality, and the factors that contribute to emergency room use and hospitalizations in PWS. And we think it'll be an excellent complement to our longitudinal Path for PWS study. So between Path, which looks over, several years, and this study, which looks at, 1 year time point, but everybody who's gone to the hospital in the entire US who has a diagnosis of PWS, we should have a really good understanding of the clinical problems that, result in hospitalization in PWS. And I think it will be important for guiding our priorities in the coming years. The final grant that we'll be funding this year is an evaluating direct play intervention for preschoolers and long-term follow-up of the PRETEND program. So this is a follow-on study from Dr. Anastasia Dimitropoulos, who has developed this PRETEND program, which is a play-based intervention for young children with Prader-Willi syndrome. She and her group have shown that this intervention improves the social cognition of children with PWS. And, one of our mandates as FPWR's mandate is to make sure that if there is an intervention that is working, that we get it out to as many people as possible. So the goal of this study is to make this program readily accessible to families by developing an online training program so that, your interventionist, your, occupational therapist, or, your early intervention teacher can learn the PRETEND program, and it can be more widely available for anyone with PWS. We're excited about this program because this is an experienced PWS researcher. They've shown that the PRETEND program is helpful for children with PWS. It's specific for the challenges that we see in PWS compared to, other neurodevelopmental disorders. And one of FPWR's goals is to increase the dissemination of any intervention that, our grant program supports. So the long-term goal of this study is to disseminate this PWS-specific program to improve the social and cognitive skills of children with PWS, and also to demonstrate the long-term impact of the program as children develop into, young adulthood or older childrenhood. So, that is all of the new grants that we're funding in 2023. Looking ahead towards the end of the year and into 2024, there's just so much research activity going on. It's really an exciting time in our field. We'll be moving our global PWS registry to a new platform. We're very excited about that. It should be a nicer look and feel, allow us some more flexibility, allow us to translate the registry. So some big opportunities there. We're really interested. We've done the Path for PWS study, which looks like at children and adults with PWS. We'd like to really focus now on understanding some of the problems that the 0 to 4 group has. So look for that in 2024. We'll be launching a study of transcutaneous vagus nerve stimulation as a potential therapy to reduce temper outbursts in PWS. We've tried to make that clinical trial as easy as possible for participants. So there's only 2 visits over an entire year, because we understand your child or young adult who has temper outbursts may not be the easiest to take to a clinical trial. So, hopefully there'll be a lot of interest in that. That is a significant problem for a lot of families. There are, as I said, a lot of clinical trials ongoing. In the coming year, we expect to see Soleno seek approval for their drug DCCR for PWS, which would be super exciting. And as I said, many other clinical trials ongoing that we really would love to see completed so that we can understand what works in PWS and get as many approvals for safe and effective drugs as we can and devices. And then finally, please save the date for our conference in 2024 in Atlanta in September. I think it's going to be a great conference. We've already got our first abstract submitted for that. So we're really looking forward to that. So that was a lot to go through. Susan, I will stop sharing and maybe we can talk about some of the questions.
Absolutely. Theresa, as always, a fantastic presentation. I really appreciate how you take some of these concepts that are so challenging for folks that don't have a medical background and really make it more understandable for us. So thank you. It's not an easy task to do. We are going to move into questions. Again, if you would like to submit a question, you can just use the Q&A function here in Zoom. We'll go through as many questions as we have time for, which is about 10 minutes. I wanted to touch quickly on the annual conference because we did get a couple questions coming in about that. Theresa, you mentioned we had so much research presentations that we're actually expanding the conference next year to be, the research symposium will be 2 full days, Wednesday and Thursday. The family conference will also be 2 full days on Friday and Saturday. Are families encouraged to attend the research symposium, Theresa? Maybe you could talk a little bit about what families might expect if they were to attend.
Yeah, families are welcome to attend. I will say that it is, if you think this presentation is in the weeds, it's 100 times more in the weeds. The good news is it's really nice to see the researchers and see them collaborating and interacting. I will say that we do try to do a summary of everything that was presented at the research conference for the family conference, so that if you don't want to sit through hours and hours of SNORD 116 SNO RNA biology, we can give you in a nutshell what happens. But, I think it's especially, the only reason that we're able to do all of this is because our families, raise funds and support this research. So I think it's important for us to be able to see where this funding is going and, see the work that is getting done. So yeah, we encourage families to attend.
Yeah. And I would add that we also try to bring in a lot of the researchers who are presenting at the research symposium to give presentations that are then tailored for families at the family conference. So families are welcome to attend both or just attend the family conference. It's truly up to you. Again, that conference will be in Atlanta the last week of September next year. Let's talk a little bit about the Pretend program that you mentioned that Dr. Anastasia Dimitropoulos is now disseminating. Once that program has been disseminated, FPWR will push it out so that it's accessible to the community. We'll do this in a way very similar to what we did with the BOSS program. So BOSS was a social skills program for adults and older teenagers with Prader-Willi syndrome. It was completed at Vanderbilt, and they created a program which is available on our website to download. You can give it to your therapist. Parents are welcome to look at it themselves. We've also begun working recently with PWSA. They are now offering social skill groups, the BOSS groups, to the community. Once the Pretend program has been disseminated, we will, again, try to launch that in a very similar way, making it available on our website and perhaps partnering with PWSA or other groups to help make the program available completely. Going back to the CLIC, Theresa, the clinical trials group, when you showed the map, there were some distinct areas throughout the US that were perhaps lacking some trial centers, like the Southeast or the Southwest. Are there any plans to actively engage some new trial centers to help complete some of those areas that are perhaps, they don't have a center as local to them?
Yeah, I would say there's no formal plan right now, right? The initial sort of gathering was a self-identification of the clinicians that were interested, because it's fairly early in the CLIC network. But yes, certainly moving forward, I think we would be interested in trying to identify clinicians from some of the areas that look, that have holes in them, so to speak, to participate. So it's open to any clinical sites. They have to commit to having enough resources to participate in some of the programs that the CLIC is doing. It's not all clinical trials. A lot of it is just caring for individuals with PWS. So yes, we're looking to expand that, although like I said, it's kind of early days. I think that will be sort of next on the list once we get our database set up for everybody and kind of get all that on board.
Great. There was a question about slides. This webinar has been recorded and it will be made available. We will also take clips of just each funded grant and insert that into the website as well. So after this webinar is concluded, we will make this available to everyone. Let's talk about AI. Are any of our researchers using artificial intelligence to expedite their research? If so, which ones? And are there any initial results from those studies?
Yeah, so we're just starting to apply, we being everybody, not like me, to apply AI to some of the data sets with PWS. There are researchers, actually a young man, high school student, which is what you need, right? Young, smart minds who are much more able to use AI. Is collaborating with a researcher at Georgetown University to use AI to, so all of our researchers have different data sets, right? So maybe this one has used stem cells to compare PWS to typical cells, and another one has used the stem cells from baby teeth, and so pulling all that information together and using AI to find the shared pathways is one really exciting application. There are many others as well. And, the entire scientific community is, thinking of ways to apply AI. But yes, we have started doing it in PWS. Some of it, the researchers have started themselves, and some of it that FPWR is looking at different platforms for AI, applying AI to some of our data sets. So yes, I think it's going to be fantastic. And, we're definitely going down that pathway.
We have time for one last question, and I think this is a great one to end today's talk. Is there anything the PWS community can do at this time to help further DCCR along?
Well, I think right at this moment, Soleno has said that they're going to be submitting their new drug application in the middle of next year. So, that's their thing to do. They will pull the data from their clinical trial. They also did a comparison of the DCCR participants to the PATH for PWS participants. So shout out to everybody who was in PATH, because you're also helping provide evidence that DCCR is safe and effective in PWS. So Soleno will do that. Now the FDA, after that, after they've looked at the new drug application, they may do a, I'm blanking on the term, advisory committee meeting. Yes, thank you. And they'll announce that, and that would be an opportunity for the PWS community to share their experience with DCCR, and we would work with PWSA and anybody else who wants to work together to try to make sure that the high points are hit, and that the FDA gets the information it needs about the unmet need in the community and about the impact of the drug in individuals with PWS. So I think at this point, general advocacy for rare disease and PWS is important, and then down the line, just keep an eye out. And if there's an FDA advisory committee meeting, that would be the time for the community to really let their voice be known.
Great. Well, we are hitting the top of the hour. Thank you to everyone who joined this webinar. It has been recorded. We will share it on our website afterwards, and we will be sure to continue to send out information to keep all of you up to date on the latest in PWS research. Have a wonderful day. Have a great one. Bye.